this webinar, so don't worry about scrambling to take notes. It'll be up on our YouTube channel tomorrow. All right, so I'm excited to chat with you all tonight about teaching life cycles with birds. For those of you who haven't joined us in a webinar before, I want to take a moment to introduce you to our platform, Zoom. So when I went full screen, it probably went full screen for you too. I recommend that you actually exit the full screen from your top option menu or hit escape, and that's going to serve the function of letting you dock your chat window to the side of the screen. So the next step would then be to find the little bubble that looks like a speech bubble, and click on that icon and open up your chat window. Then you want to make sure that you're sending to all panelists and attendees. If you just send to panelists, then you won't be able to have a discussion amongst yourselves. So we'll try and have a couple opportunities for some discussion. And I know with times being what they are, it's even more useful to have an opportunity to talk about how you're feeling and what you're thinking and adaptations that you might need to use for some of these materials. So please feel free to use the chat window as a space to do that. And if you've joined us in a webinar before, you know that this is usually the part where I ask you to share where you're from and what your role as an educator is. And I'd like to add a component to that tonight. Something that I like to do with kids sometimes is have them do what I call a weather check-in. And this is just a way of saying how you're feeling, but using terms of the weather. And so things have been pretty crazy lately, so I'm feeling like it's a little blustery, and I don't know if the wind's gonna blow hot or cold. So go ahead and include that a little bit in your write-in so we can check in with each other. Clarissa from North Carolina, 7th grade science, awesome, partly cloudy. Julie Hunt, middle and high, Texas, partly sunny. Christine from North Carolina, a little bit stormy, a little unsettled. Yeah. Pound Ridge, New York. Welcome, Mary. Seeing some more partly cloudy, some more mostly sunnies. That's nice. I love to see a mostly sunny. Charlotte, North Carolina. Cynthia, K through 5, feeling a little sunburned. Michigan, all ages. New Jersey, junior naturalist program, very cool. Awesome, it's so nice to see that we have, a wide variety of teachers. Marilyn, I appreciate your weather check-in. Blustery, but sun tomorrow. I like to believe that there's sun tomorrow too. Welcome everyone. Thanks so much for introducing yourself and sharing how you're feeling. It seems like there's some unsettled weather out there, but also some hope for rainbows and some hope for sunshine. So awesome. So I'm with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and our mission at the lab is to interpret and conserve the Earth's biological diversity through research, education, and citizen science focused on birds. And like many organizations across the country right now, we are entering into a new phase for a lot of us, working remotely, shuttering the doors to our visitor center, just to try and do our part for our community. And I specifically work with the K-12 education team, where our mission is to create innovative resources and trainings that build science skills while inspiring young people to connect to local habitats, explore biodiversity, and engage in citizen science projects. My name is Kelly Schaefer, and I'm the education specialist. And I'm joined in the chat window tonight by Jennifer Fee, who is the manager of K-12 programs, and she's there to help answer questions and share some links. And if you guys want to do some discussing about what we're talking about in there, she can be there with you. So awesome. Let's dive right in. Oh, and just a reminder that Jen's pointing out to make sure you're sending your chats to all panelists and attendees. You change that right near where you see the to button, and that'll just allow you to see each other's comments. Awesome. So this webinar, we're gonna focus on some bird biology. And I thought this might be nice to maybe do a little more heavier focus on this than I usually do, because for me, at this time, I'm finding it really comforting to look out my window and seeing birds go about their daily business. There's a pair of ravens in my backyard getting ready to nest on a tower back there. So it's pretty nice to see spring rolling in and life continuing on. So we're going to focus on some bird biology, as well as some lessons and some ways that you can engage students in participating in citizen science projects like NestWatch. We'll talk about the nesting cycle. We'll even talk about how to make sure you can safely check nests if you want to involve your students in a project like this, or you want to do this at home with your kids. So let's take a moment to focus on citizen science. I mentioned that NestWatch is a citizen science project, and these projects are really awesome. They are often kind of naturally focused, where you go out and you make observations of the natural world. You share those observations with a database that scientists can then use to answer real-world questions. So we really view citizen science as a partnership between regular folks like you and me who aren't professional scientists. And we spend our time and our energy collecting our observations and sharing that with scientists. And that has that real world component, right? Because this data is not stagnant, it's constantly being updated. Scientists are actually using it to answer real world questions. And what's more is answer questions that they couldn't possibly answer without these huge, powerful databases. So when it comes to citizen science, why use it as an educator? Well, it does a lot of really powerful things for us. So it gets kids outside, it meets our STEM content and science practice standards. It can lead to some really authentic questions and experience of science. It also can help us develop connections to our local habitats. So getting outside and making these observations can make us aware of things that we didn't know existed in our own neighborhoods. And that can help promote a sense of ownership and a sense of connection and build some stewardship practices. It's also a really cool way to dive into science and math with real life data, and helps kind of create this connection to the scientific community in a really authentic way. Plus, hey, it's fun. Who doesn't like getting outside and getting to get in touch with their local habitats, with getting to make observations, and just being curious? Plus, it answers that essential question for kids: why are we doing this? Well, we're doing it because your data really matters. It really has an impact. So NestWatch is a really cool program. Its website is nestwatch.org, and I'll ask Jen to share that link with you in the chat window. And this is what you'll see when you pop onto the front page of NestWatch. NestWatch is a project that's all about observing nesting attempts for birds. So it helps us track the reproductive ecology and reproductive success of different species. So here you can see that a bunch of different stats about the Carolina chickadee. You can see that in 2016, 726 nesting attempts were monitored. So far in this year, even though it's only March, there have already been 68 nest attempts that are being monitored. So that's pretty cool. And so all of this data comes together into this huge database that lets us kind of track trends in the success of bird reproduction. And so this map that I'm sharing with you here is all species across all years, and it's showing all of the nesting attempts that NestWatch has data for. You can see down in the corner there that that's 105,830 nest sites, which is pretty awesome. That's a huge database. All that information really helps us understand breeding birds a lot better. So this is what NestWatch data kind of breaks down to look like. It's aggregated in a couple different ways, and all of it really centers around this first point of the nest site. So for this example, we're going to talk about a nest box for our cavity nesting birds. So say you have a nest box on your schoolyard or on a trail or in your backyard. And this is going to be your nest location, and you're going to track the nests that happen at this location. And so underneath that nest site is a nesting attempt, and the first attempt might be an eastern bluebird. And you'll record how that nest goes through a series of visits, and then finally a summary of how the nest, whether it was successful or whether it failed. And in this case, we think of success as whether or not young fledged from the nest. Then you can see the second attempt is actually a different species, a tree swallow, following that same protocol of visiting and recording what's going on, another success. And then the third attempt for this particular nest site was a failure from an eastern bluebird where the young did not survive. And so you might have multiple nest sites, you might have multiple attempts at a single nest site. All of this data gets tied together and helps us paint a bigger, broader picture about what's happening out there for birds. And a lot of what we're talking about tonight comes from this curricula, which is available as a free download from our website. It's for 5th through 8th grade students. It's called Thinking Outside of the Nest Box. It was created in conjunction with 4-H in New York State, so it's been pilot tested. And it was a ton of fun from what I understand. So this was written by our friends at NestWatch. And it does a really good job of breaking down everything you need to know to participate in NestWatch and also get the most out of the data from the program as you're trying to meet science and math standards. It's also highly adaptable to out-of-school contexts, but probably with a little less of that data component. So let's talk about nest boxes and why we use nest boxes. Nest boxes, from a bird's perspective, mimic a tree cavity. So there are a lot of birds out there that are tree cavity nesters, or just cavity nesters, you'll often hear them referred to as. And they need these cavities to build their nests in. And that's kind of a problem because tree cavities tend to appear in old trees, dying trees, dead trees, and these are often the trees that we're removing from our landscapes. So that can cause a real problem for birds. So putting out nest boxes can kind of reduce some of that harm, provide locations for birds to nest, and kind of allow us to, when we have to, take down these trees. When we can, it's best to leave them up, but nest boxes are a great way to provide some support to your local birds. So what makes a good nest box versus what makes a bad nest box, or maybe a less good nest box? So you'll see on the left here pictured a classic bluebird box. It's got that nice sloped roof. It's made with untreated wood. The entrance hole is the right size for your target species. Actually, this is super important. Birds are really picky about the entrance size for their nest boxes. Too big and a smaller bird won't nest there. Too small, and obviously you might exclude the bird that you're trying to attract. So that can be a really important factor in whether your nest box get used or not. You also want to make sure that your nest box has a door that opens. This is going to allow you to clean it out after every season so that new nests can be built in the next time. Or heaven forbid something goes wrong and a bird dies in there, then you can clean it out for the safety of the next nesting pair. It's also great to have a predator guard just to help make sure that the nest box is secure. So some of the things that make a bad nest box would be multiple holes. You also don't want perches, and this can seem kind of counterintuitive because you think, hey, a bird wants to be able to land here to get in. The birds that belong there can get there. They can land on the hole and slide right in. All perches really do is provide a place of access for predators. So a larger bird can just sit right there and stick its head in and raid the nest. So we don't want to do that. And again, you want to make sure that it's securely attached, that your box opens. If it's glued shut, you can't clean it. Just some things to keep in mind. Another thing you want to keep in mind is habitat. So these are a few different kinds of habitats that you might find. So we have an open woodland where the trees are fairly sparse. We have a nice lake area, a town or a city. We have a wetland, a forest, and a shrubby habitat. And the reason it's important to consider habitat is because birds have different preferences. And if you put a box for a bluebird out in the middle of a shrubby habitat, you might not get a bluebird. So, or the middle of the forest, I should say, you might not get a bluebird because it's not the right habitat for them. So you need to consider both the habitat that you have and the bird that you are trying to attract. So it's all about the right bird, the right habitat, and the right house. So let's just look at a couple of these birds I have pictured here and make a couple guesses as to where we think they might nest. So taking a look at this robin, where do you think a robin might nest? We can go back and look at these habitats. Open woodlands. Yeah. Towns too, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, so robins are fairly versatile, right? They might be in the open woodland, definitely in a town or city. Has anybody had one nest in like the wreath on their door? That happens sometimes. Forest as well. Yeah, so different kinds of habitats there. Let's go jump to on the bottom right-hand corner, the tree swallow. Where do you think a tree swallow might nest? There's kind of a hint in the picture there. You can see that they, well, I guess they're hanging out on a fence, but these are cavity nesters. I'll give that hint. They might do like the edge of a field or forest. Yeah, they need trees because they need cavity. You definitely will see them around wetlands. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, nice. What about our friend the mourning dove? Town or city for sure. Definitely see them nesting there. Open forests. Yep. Forests. Yeah. Mourning doves are also really pretty versatile. They crack me up though because their nests are pretty shabby looking. They are particularly twiggy. They don't look super well made, but yet they manage to raise their young in them just fine. Oh my gosh. You had one nest in an open window. That's hilarious. My sister is a chemical engineer and she had one nest on top of a chemical tank and they had to keep removing it because it was not safe for it to be near the valve. And then what about our wood duck? They are pretty cool ducks. Anybody know anything about where these birds nest? It might surprise you if you weren't familiar with them. Yeah, so they actually nest in trees. Crazy, right? So they definitely like to be near water. But they actually are cavity nesters and they will nest pretty high up sometimes in trees. If you ever get the chance, go find a YouTube video of wood duck nestlings leaving the nest. It's pretty amazing. They just jump right out of a tree, bounce off the ground, and go on their merry way like nothing happened. Cool. So just trying to drive home here the idea that you need to think pretty carefully about the type of habitat that you have and the type of bird you want to attract, and that's going to influence the nest box that you choose. Thankfully, NestWatch, their website, has this really awesome interactive called Right Bird, Right House that's going to help you make the right choices for your area. All right, so let's get into the nesting cycle. There are 6 steps to the nesting cycle. Does anybody want to hazard a guess at what the very first step might be? And that little icon can help give you a clue. Ooh, even before they pair up and find a mate, there's a step that often comes, and it's part of Julie's suggestion. It's part of attracting a mate. Ah, Marilyn's got it. Territory. Very first thing that most male birds are gonna do when they come back from migration or when the weather starts to change is they're gonna find and defend a territory. All right, what's the next step after that? Find a mate. You got it. After you find a mate, in the PG version of this, eggs, you bet. Well, even before the eggs come around, you got to build that nest. So build a nest and lay eggs. You got it. I can see people are already jumping to the next step. Perfect. Yep, after you build a nest and lay those eggs comes the long period of incubation. You better sit on them. That's right, Deborah. After incubation, when those eggs hatch, yep, you better feed, feed, feed those babies. Awesome. And then of course, the final step here would be kick them out. That's right. Time to fledge. Off you go out into the wide and wild world. Fledge from the nest. So those are our 6 steps. Let's take just a moment to go through them a little bit more in depth because there's some cool biology going on here. When it comes, find a new world, Muhammad, that's right. Time to fledge. All right, when it comes to finding and defending a territory, most male birds defend a breeding territory during the breeding season. This territory is really important because it has to contain not only all of the resources that the male and the female need to live, but everything that they need to raise their young as well. And that's a lot of food that these young take to reach the fledging stage. And so some territories are going to be small if the food source is rich. So like a seed-eating bird might have a smaller territory than something like a raptor, which might have a much larger territory because that's the space that it needs to find all of its resources. Individuals in a breeding colony are going to have a much smaller territory that they need, but they will defend it pretty fiercely. And red-winged blackbirds actually, like this one pictured here, actually have a really cool breeding system, really, really highly dependent on territory. So the better quality males can defend higher quality territories. And sometimes that territory might be high quality enough that it's actually going to attract several females. So one red-winged blackbird might mate with several different females and have several different nests on its territory. Pretty cool. The next step is finding a mate. And again, this is largely burdensome on the males. So they have to show off in one way or another to show off their quality and attract a female. That might be songs, that might be displays. It might have to do more with the territory selection. Some birds, like the house wren, will build dummy nests in several locations just to show off, hey, look at this site. This would be a great place for a nest. And we'll take the female around and then she'll choose the final location. And then there's also sort of courtship behaviors that are built into these. They might build the nest together. The male might guard the female as she builds the nest. And then there can be feeding that goes on between them too. Pretty cool. Building a nest can be pretty energy intensive for some birds. I'm always so impressed by the structures that they manage to build, even without the use of hands. And they use all sorts of different materials, from twigs and sticks, leaves. Some will even use mud. Ground nesters might use rocks. I've seen chickadees gather fur from coyote scat to use in their nests. So they're very resourceful. In areas where there's trash, you'll often see plastic woven into nests as well. And there's all sorts of different types of nests that you might encounter. You can see a scrape nest. That's something that a ground nester might build, where they just kind of make a little depression for their eggs, all the way to the dome nest of another ground nesting bird. So something like an ovenbird will do that as well. That's how they get their name. They build almost like a little wood fire oven sort of shape. All the way to these incredible woven pendant nests that the Baltimore Orioles are building. It's the classic cup nest as that you might see from an American robin. So there's all sorts of different type of nests, and these suit all sorts of different needs, and there are trade-offs here. So for example, the woodpecker viewed here They're cavity nesters. Woodpeckers build the cavities for their nests, and then in the next year they move on and build a new cavity. Other birds then move into these cavities and reuse them. And so these nests are great because they're super well protected, right? A cavity nest is really a very protected nest. But the trade-off here is that they're very limited resource. There are only so many cavities around, especially if you're hanging around waiting for a woodpecker to be done with it. So there are trade-offs to all these different sorts of nests. The next step is laying your eggs. This is a really energy intensive process. Oh, I'm seeing that there's some issues with this PowerPoint right now. I apologize. I will try and read to you the writing that is wonky. I see a question about platform nests. Are they only used by raptors? I hesitate to use the word only. I know it's pretty I would say bigger birds. So I would consider like the nests that a heron builds to be a pretty much platform style nest. A large, round, circular bundle of twigs that supports the eggs and doesn't really have a super cup built in. So I think platform nests aren't necessarily just raptors, but they tend to be larger birds that, you know, this is really the only way they're gonna build a nest that they fit on. All right, so laying eggs is the next step. So we refer to the number of eggs laid during a single nesting attempt as the clutch. And clutch number is going to vary from species to species and even nesting attempt to nesting attempt. So for example, bluebird might lay 4 eggs on its first nesting attempt. And if that nest is successful or if it fails, they're going to try and get another nest through in that year. And so these these eggs are really, really energetically costly to produce, and the next clutch might only be 3 eggs. So eggs are super, super energy intensive. And between species of birds and the size of birds, laying times may vary, but often in songbirds, it's 1 egg a day. The next step is incubating eggs. And so this is really, really important because for development to start within the egg, they must reach a certain temperature. And birds will not actually start incubating their eggs until the penultimate or second to last egg is laid. And that kind of evens out the hatch time because the eggs will sit dormant for a time until that certain temperature is reached. And then that temperature must be maintained for the young to develop properly. Once the young hatch, it's called brooding. So different terminology there. All right, so the chicks hatch through the use of an egg tooth. This is a little protuberance that happens on the top of the beak that they can then rub against the shell and use to crack it open. And this process is known as pipping. Usually just incredible experience to get to see a bird pipping. And one of the best ways to observe that is going to be through the bird cams. So the Cornell lab actually has a number of bird cams that you can check out. And I think some of them are just getting rolling now as the breeding season begins. And so I'll ask Jen to share a link to the bird cams in the chat window with you all. Definitely check them out. It's such a cool, intimate look into the lives of birds. Once the young hatch, they usually fall into two categories. So either they're precocial, like ducks or shorebirds, meaning they already are feathered, they're pretty much able to move on their own. They might need some help figuring out how and what to eat, but they are moving. The second kind is altricial young. These are your kind of pink, naked, squirmy, helpless young that I have heard affectionately referred to as fugly because they're a little bit funky and a little bit ugly. I personally feel that they are pretty darn cute. But these require a longer time in the nest. All right, the next step is feeding and raising young. This can be a really time-intensive and dangerous part because as the parents go back and forth to the nest, they can draw the attention of predators. And the length of time this takes is going to vary widely depending on the type of bird and the species of bird. So for example, something like a titmouse might have a 2-week nestling period where they're feeding and raising their young in the nest. Something like a raptor might have a much larger period of time. The next step is fledging from the nest. So once the young have reached a stage where they're more or less fully feathered, they have that full set of flight feathers, but they might not necessarily be capable of full flight yet, they will leave the nest. This is usually a term that applies only to altricial nestlings or those helpless nestlings when they're first born. And this is also the period of time where you might run into a baby bird on the ground and think it's in distress, but it's not. It's their awkward teenage phase. They've just got to go through it and get out the other side. So if it's fully feathered, if it's not in immediate danger, if the parents are nearby, leave it be. This is a natural part of its life cycle where it's not, it can jump and it can flap, but it's not going to be fully flying yet. All right, so we've learned about the nesting cycle and we've learned a little bit about how to think about choosing the right nest box. Now it's time to talk about how to check nest boxes. So NestWatch has a code of conduct, and this exists for your safety and the bird's safety. And basically all it does is it teaches you how to check a nest in a way that's not going to cause any accidental harm to the parents or the nestlings, and allows us to observe and gather data in a way that is safe for our feathered friends. So you want to be sure that you plan ahead for your nest visits. You want to observe every 3 to 4 days, so you want to think about how that falls on your schedule. And you want to plan for around 30 days of total time. That's about how long most songbird nests are going to take to go to their final stage. So that means maybe 7 to 10 visits that you might be visiting this nest. You also want to make sure that your visits last no longer than a minute. You want to really minimize the time that you're there to minimize the disturbance. So usually that means going, making your observation, and then moving away to write that data down. And NestWatch is great because it has a number of ways that you can collect your data. You can use a paper data sheet, or you can use their new app to enter your data straight into the database. So whatever way you're more comfortable with, whatever way your students might be more comfortable with, you can use to collect your data. But the key is make your observation at the nest, move on, then write your data down. You do not want to check nests in the early morning or the late evening. And that has a lot to do with how birds lay their eggs and how they take care of them through the night. So most birds are going to lay their eggs early in the morning prior to 10 a.m. usually after 10 a.m., it's okay to check the nest. And that's just how their biology works. That's when they lay the eggs, usually one a day. Once the number of eggs stays the same in the nest, then the timing is slightly less important on the morning end. The reason timing is important at night is that most birds are going to stay on their nest during the nighttime. You do not want to scare them off at dusk because they might not come back or have time to come back before it gets dark, and then there's nobody sitting on the eggs or the young all night, and that's not good. Of course, owls are going to be an exception to this because they are largely nocturnal, so it's okay to check their nests near sunset. There are a few species of owls that will nest in cavities, so you might be able to keep an eye on those. Excuse me, in cavities and nest boxes. Another stage that you want to be careful of is early incubation. That's just because females are just getting into the swing of things. They're new moms. They're just figuring out how things are working. And they want to have some time to settle in. So try not to approach during this period. Observe from afar and wait for the female to leave if you have the time to do that. And then the final stage you really want to be careful of is when it's close to fledging. That's why it's important to keep going these 3 to 4 regular visits so you can have that timing down pretty closely, because when the young are close to fledging, it's really easy to scare them off the nest and they won't go back. They'll interpret you as a predator. They'll think their best chance is to move on, and then they are fledged, and it's really heartbreaking when that happens. I mean, they might be fine. You just don't want to risk it. And then, of course, this one is probably pretty common sense, but it never hurts to state it. Avoid checking nests during the bad weather. If it's cold and rainy, you really don't want to force the female off the nest. You would want to make sure that the adults can be there regulating the temperature of their eggs and young. So come back another day if you can. Here's one that is super important and not super intuitive. So you want to be really careful about how you approach nests. You do not want to make a dead end trail that leads to a nest, because if you approach and leave a nest from the same way every time, you start to leave a trail. And predators can pick up on that scent trail. So you want to approach from one side, leave from another, the other day approach from another angle and leave from another. You just want to be conscious of not leaving dead end trails. And predators are very smart. If they learn that they can follow you to one nest, they're going to follow you to more nests. I've worked on a breeding ecology project where we were putting nest cams on wild birds out in the forest and recording what happened to their nests. And we had to disguise the cameras with vegetation and scent hiders sometimes, because crows especially were smart enough to learn that if they saw a camera, there was a nest nearby, then they would just search around until they found it. So you just don't underestimate predators. Just be conscious of how you approach and leave a nest site. And then as you get closer, when it's time to check, you want to try not to scare the parent off of it directly. You want to try and see if they're on it already. Wait a few minutes if you can before you check the nest. If the bird flushes, give it a few seconds to kind of move away before you step in. And then sometimes with nest boxes, you just can't tell. Tap lightly on the side. The female might make a noise inside if she's in there. She might pop off the nest. But some of them are feisty and will sit tight, and you won't know until you open the door that she's on there. So do it slowly, because if she springs off of there, it will be a heart attack for you and a heart attack for her. And you don't want to force a bird off the nest. If you know that the female is there, give her some time to leave it. Try maybe checking another nest if you have multiples and coming back. And then make sure that you aren't handling eggs or young. It's against the law. There's usually no need to do it. If you have trouble seeing a nest insides, I recommend using a small hand mirror, and that will allow you to get into tighter angles and or things that are above your eyesight. All right, next step, you know how to put out nest boxes, you know the nesting cycle, you know how to check a nest box. What about those natural nests? It doesn't have to be a nest box to participate in NestWatch. It can be any nesting bird, which means finding nests. And so there are some cool behavior tips that you can keep in mind while you're out and about that will help you find a nest. And let's break this down by stages. So during the nest building stage, birds are going to show you where the nests are. They're carrying material. They're really focused on what they're doing. Sometimes they'll be a little sneaky, like they'll land in one tree and then they'll look around and then they'll fly way straight to somewhere else. And it's usually that farther point is where the nest is. But you can follow them and you can use the clues of where they keep disappearing to find a nest. One tip I will give you though is during nest building, it's really easy to force a female to abandon the nest. They're a little bit extra skittish. They don't have much energy invested in this endeavor yet. If they think you know where they are, they might just abandon and start somewhere else. So just once you find it, get a quick look at it, take note of where it is, and then move away. Just don't want to pressure her. During the egg laying period, you're not going to get much help. There's not going to be a female going to and from the nest. They're only on the nest one time a day, and then they're off doing whatever else is that they need to do. So this is a difficult time to find nests. Usually you just got to get lucky. The next stage is incubation. This is a little easier because you might see some movement from these birds, but they're deliberately trying to be secretive now. They're going to disappear. So you might be seeing a female go to sort of the same area and then she just disappears. But if she disappears in the same area multiple times, you can make a good guess that there might be a nest there. Sometimes the males will just start singing their hearts out again because they're feeling pretty proud of themselves. More likely they feel like they have something to defend. But I'm going to project for a minute. Another thing to do is watch for flushing birds. So if you are walking down a pathway and a bird flies out of a bush, and the next day you walk down that pathway and the bird flies out of the same bush, that's a good signal to you that there might be a nest in that bush. So if it flies suddenly from a same spot over and over again, check it out. There might be a nest there. When it gets to the nestling phase, this is where the parents are harried and they are busy, busy, busy. They're going to be in and out with food. They're going to be in and out removing fecal sacs. You might even hear the young calling and begging for food. These are noisy phases. You might be able to find a fair amount of nests this way once you start to learn what a baby bird sounds like. Just be aware that if you find a nest and you think it's a nestling phase, you want to just observe it from a little ways away before you start making your NestWatch observations and getting closer, just to make sure they're not super close to fledging. This is also a great phase where if you have binoculars and you can hang back, you can count the heads that come up. And so if you're worried about approaching because you don't know what stage it is yet, you might still be able to tell the number of young just by looking for the begging beaks. All right. So let's talk a little bit about data and NestWatch data and why it's important. This is some NestWatch data looking at mountain bluebirds over a period of time from 1997 to 2015. And we're looking at the percentage of successful nests over this time period. we can see some peaks and valleys, that there's kind of a natural cycle of change. There's some good years and there's some bad years. But knowing what is kind of this long-term average helps us know when things start to change. So if we started to see lower peaks and lower valleys, and then all of a sudden this average number starts to change, we can realize that there's something going wrong in this bird. Something's affecting its reproductive ecology. Maybe this is a signal to us to pay closer attention. So when we have enough data over a long enough period of time, we can start to see declines or increases in species, which can flag us to pay special attention to these species, to start initiating conservation efforts, and to really just understand the state of our birds a lot better. So this image here, I want to point out, this map is actually from the Right Bird, Right Habitat Interactive. So you can find out what species are in decline in your region, and you might want to focus your efforts on creating nesting habitat for those birds. So just something to consider. You could put out boxes or platforms that are specifically designed to help the birds that are struggling in your area. And I think that's a really cool thing for students to know too, is that they're helping provide nesting locations for a bird in decline. And all of this data, of course, is available to you to explore on the NestWatch website. You can also look at your own data. It'll keep track of that for you over the years. I definitely recommend checking out the data tabs on Project NestWatch's website. And your data really helps us put these big picture trend pictures together. I want to just remind you that you can download this curriculum for free from our website, and that there are excuse me, a lot of the slides that I used today are actually available to you from the NestWatch download. So you can download these slides for your use as well, which is pretty awesome. We also have a lot of other resources to help support your learning around life cycles and breeding birds. As I mentioned, the curriculum is 5th through 8th grade, but we have resources like this wonderful, charming book on Bird Hill for K through 2, with this really handy teaching guide that meets all sorts of standards and turns what is kind of a fun, whimsical story into science and art and math activities. So we have ways to support different age learners, of course, as they explore life cycles with birds. I also highly recommend checking out the bird cams, which I mentioned once earlier, but I want to flag for you again. These cams are a really intimate window into the life of birds. You'll see parents bringing food, preening their young, sitting on the eggs, cooing when the eggs hatch. Like, it's a really powerful look at everything that goes into raising a young bird. We'll flag you with a word of caution that it's very real. You can see a couple dead squirrels here in this image. That's what great horned owls eat. You might actually see that squirrel brought back and eaten on screen. There was a bald eagle cam some years ago that a house cat was brought to. So it is realistic, and sometimes it's disturbing for younger audiences, but I think that there are ways to frame that make it a really powerful learning experience. I also want to talk a little bit more about the K-12 team's response to everything that's going on with coronavirus initiatives across the country to slow the spread of this virus, which is leading to these social distancing practices. So I just want you to be aware that we have been putting together some resources for you all. We are going to be sending out a newsletter tomorrow, which is going to have K through 8 activities around bird diversity. So you can sign up for that at the link that you see at the bottom of your screen there. We also have a Facebook group to create some community and share ideas. And we're hoping that you will share resources there, and then maybe we'll get some discussions going on around the activities that we're providing. The activities are written to be done with 1, 2 kids, you know, a small group, a family group of kids. If you have parents that you know are in need, or as an educator you're trying to help direct to resources, we're hopeful that this will help serve our community during this time. Any questions about what we talked about today? I think I saw, maybe I missed a Q&A earlier, so let me back up and look at that. And while you guys are thinking about questions, please remember that you can always reach out to us through our social media, find us on our website, or email us at k12lab@cornell.edu. So the question I see here is, when a bluebird builds a nest somewhere inconvenient, how can you relocate the nest? Can't really, unfortunately. It's illegal to mess with nests and eggs. I realize that sometimes they're just in places that won't work, and there's not really a good solution for anybody in that place. You can't really move a nest and have the female find it again. You might be able to shift it incrementally, but again, that's not really legal. Unfortunately, I totally feel you there. My cousin had a Carolina wren build a nest in their open garage, and they had it open a couple times across a weekend, and it built its nest in these 2 days, and they didn't know. And then what do? Like, sometimes there are these conflicts and there aren't easy solutions. Cynthia's asking, when cleaning out a bird box, what cleaner should you use or not use? Depends on how messy it is. I would avoid using cleaner at all. Usually, if there's mites, maybe you do need to use something. I would use what you use to clean a bird feeder, which is a really diluted bleach solution, and then just make sure it is rinsed really well and dries out entirely before you put it up again. I've done it just with water before, and that's worked pretty well. Cynthia's asking also, do most birds make a new nest each year? Many do. Some return and use the same nest over and over. Bald eagles are pretty famous for that. Their nests can over time reach to be 2 tons because they keep adding on every year. But most birds are going to build a new nest each year. Songbirds especially do this. Very infrequently will they reuse, but there's always an exception to the rule, right? Somebody's going to do it just to prove us wrong. Let's see, what else do we have? What's the best resource to help us figure out house patterns to make and where to place nest boxes? Oh boy, do I have a resource for you. I'm going to stop my screen share and of the PowerPoint and try and go online, so bear with me for a second. Okay, can you still see my screen? Okay, so here is, awesome. Here is the Right Bird, Right House Interactive. So you would go to the Learn tab, and then you would come down here. I like this one. You can also go to All About Birdhouses. This is about finding plans. I like to go through Right Bird, Right House because it helps me think about the birds in my area. So this is how I'm going to take you through it. You want to select your region. So I'll do for New York, and I'll do my nearby habitat, which is forest, and I'll click see results. And what's going to come up is a list of birds for my region, and I can scroll through and I can look at them and think, oh man, which do I want to build? Oh, I would love to see an eastern screech owl. It's a species in decline. Maybe I'll check this plan out. What's cool is you can also see these ratings. So this is a moderate plan. So I might think twice about this one if I'm concerned about building it with young kids. I might say, oh, great horned owl, kid-friendly, simple plan. Let's take a look. And then you just enter your email and you'll get the plans sent to you. You'll be able to download them. And then you can come see all this incredible information. Here's information on when these birds nest in most of their range, so you know when you should have the nest box up by. Here's information on how high it should be, between 15 and 45 feet. The minimum spacing, because this is a large bird with a large territory, you need 1.5 miles between them. So that's like one box for me, I guess. But other birds are going to be much closer together. So if you were to look at, for example, this Carolina chickadee, you would see that these only have to be 30 feet apart. And then this gives you all that great information that I was talking about earlier. How big should the entrance hole be? What's the depth? Here's the width. And again, you can get plans downloaded for you. Oh, here, let's check out the preview. So there's a preview of what the plan looks like. That's my favorite resource for that. I think it's super handy. I think there was another question. Barn swallow, oh gosh, Margaret, that's such a good point. Barn swallows will often reuse nests, don't they? They refurb them a little bit, but they come back to the same location. Great point. You'll see that for cliff swallows too, I think. They'll often nest under the same bridge year after year after year. Awesome. Any other questions? Feel free to put them in the chat window. Otherwise, let me just flag for you that we do have letters of completion available to you. So if you are interested in getting a letter for 1 contact hour of PD from the Cornell Lab, you would just need to email us at k12lab@cornell.edu and we'll send that on to you. All right, I see a couple more questions. How can we provide nesting material in our yards? I have seen people do like onion bags, or you know, those mesh bags with animal, like with the shed of their dogs, their dog fur that they brush off, or hair from hair cutting, or things like that. Honestly, if you have a backyard with some habitat attached, the best thing that you can do for your birds is not to manicure the heck out of it. So if you can leave a little bit wild, that provides all sorts of materials for your birds. I think a brush pile is a great thing to have. House wrens will raid your brush pile for cocoons and spider webbing. Chickadees will do the same. So I personally haven't put out material specifically intended for nesting, but I think you can create habitats that are going to naturally provide that. How do you keep birds such as wrens out of your bluebird houses? Oh, wrens. Wrens are feisty little guys, aren't they? One thing that I've heard recommended, and my aunt has had some success with, is putting bluebird houses 2 back to back. And sometimes that will attract tree swallows on one side and bluebirds on the other. And tree swallows are a little bit more fiercely protective, and I think those joined forces allow for a better defense and less competition, which is always nice for these birds. Um, but house wrens are smaller than bluebirds. There's no real way to exclude them. So Deborah is saying that every year she leaves out some hair, some old rag shreds, and string and things for birds to use. So Cynthia is asking, how do we easily find out about other PD like this during these strange days? We're going to continue with our monthly webinars. You can find those on our website. Hopefully there won't be too many of those necessary during these times. We're thinking about ways that we can step up our PD game. A lot of people are thinking about that. A lot of people are sharing resources on that Facebook group that I mentioned. So if you have Facebook, I would, shameless self-promotion, but I would consider joining it. What's really nice to see is that a lot of people are sharing resources that they've stumbled upon, and I think that's super awesome. I believe the Citizen Science Association is going to be doing some PD as well. So, John, I hope that's fair to say, but you might consider going to the Citizen Science Association website and checking out.
Talking about it, but nothing's available there yet.
Okay.
And as it becomes available, we'll be posting it on the Facebook group.
Yeah, so Jen's absolutely right. We're going to share everything that we come across because we know that these are really unprecedented times. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I'm going to hang out for another couple minutes if you have more questions, but remember that this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel for you to check out later. Gotta say, it's so nice to see folks here tonight. And I know that you've all got a lot on your mind, and thanks for sparing a little bit of your brain power for us and for the birds. Margaret, I see your question. Sorry I missed it earlier. Keeping wasps out of birdhouses. Woo! That's a good question. I'm guessing you have like paper wasp or mud daubers or something. The best way to keep wasps out of birdhouses is to get birds in them. I'm sorry, I don't have a suggestion for you. You might consider trying some of the scareaway things that they use for sparrows. But if it's not, if the nest box isn't already occupied, then it might keep bluebirds from getting in there too. So, you know, supporting nesting birds is tricky. It's tricky. There's so much that can complicate the process. So this asking a question about a copy of the slideshow. The webinar will be available on our YouTube channel. Many of the slides that I used today are available as a free download attached to the Thinking Outside the Nest Box curriculum on our website. So you can download them from the resource page for that curriculum, which I will try and track down and put a link in the chat window. Let's see. All right, so I will share this link in the chat window. If you scroll down, you'll see the link to download the slideshow. All right. Thank you again so much for coming. It looks like a lot of folks are signing off. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself. I'll be here for another minute or two, and I hope that we will see you in a future webinar and in the Facebook group. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, everyone.